Was it? Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Americans for Limited Government podcast. I am Frank McCaffrey, making some adjustments here with ALG President Rick Manning, and I believe he is actually at home. Rick, is that true? And yes, I have to wear glasses now, ladies and gentlemen. Rick, is that true? Are you actually at home?
I am.
Okay, now we've got a lot going on right now. Mitt Romney has been a thorn in Donald Trump's side. Do you want to explain what was going on with that?
Yeah, Mitt Romney never recovered from the fact that he was rejected by the American people in 2012. He and his binder of women were rejected, and Donald Trump got elected in 2016. The American people chose Donald Trump, who Mitt Romney felt was not somebody who he really supported for president. There's been a lot of talk that Mitt Romney was actually behind the candidacy of an unknown person named Evan McMullin, who ran and really attempted to cost Donald Trump the electoral vote from Utah, and to deny him Utah, and also with the Church of Latter-day Saints being very strong in Arizona, also to have an impact on the Trump vote in Arizona. Now, this is not to say that the Church of Latter-day Saints has anything to do with this. It's just that Romney has a strong appeal as being one of the most prominent members of that church. So he's been really upset since Trump got elected. He feels as though Trump was unworthy to ever be president. And of course, him with his pedigree of his dad having been governor of Michigan and having run for president unsuccessfully in 1968, he really felt like he should have been the one, and he's been bitter ever since.
Yeah.
So now he's in the Senate. And he's decided he's going to vote. He's going to vote to convict, which not all that surprising given his actions of the past, but it really shows more about him and his inability to get over the fact that he didn't get elected than it says anything about President Donald Trump.
Now, another thing about Mitt Romney is Trump made some pretty outrageous comments about him during that 2016 campaign, and I had a feeling that Mitt didn't appreciate it at the time. Of course, he said Mitt would have fallen to his knees and begged me for my endorsement.
He did do that, and in fact, and Donald Trump did endorse him in 2016. What's more, Mitt Romney tried to become a member of the president's cabinet in 2017, seeking to become Secretary of State. So, Mitt Romney was rejected for that position, but he was given the courtesy of an interview. And so Mitt Romney then went off and ran for Senate in Utah in 2018. And it was always clear that he was going to be a thorn in everybody's side. And so here he is. He's the only bad part, the really bad part about all this is when the framers of the Constitution put together the idea of the Senate being the trial jurors for an impeachment. You have to remember, those senators were not directly elected. The framers originally had the idea that the senators would be picked by the state legislatures to be their representatives. So the Senate was always supposed to be a representative of the states, those two senators, rather than representatives of the people per se. The 17th Amendment, which happened in 1913, I think, around 1913, allowed for the direct election of senators, which totally changes the nature of that trial jury that was anticipated back during the original framing of the Constitution. And the only unfortunate part about all this is that Utah no longer has the capacity to just meet and remove Senator Mitt Romney and replace him with somebody who better represents the state of Utah.
And you didn't tear up any speeches while you
were... No, it's amazing that after the speech last night that Senator Romney sat through, he still could vote to impeach the president, to remove the president. It shows that this is some people, and I hate to say this, there's a small number of Republicans who cling to just an absolute, almost, it's an irrational dislike of this president. And he's not one of them, and they don't think he's worthy of having the job, and consequently, they are, when given a chance, a guy like Mitt Romney is going to say, well, you know what, I'm going to vote to remove him. And I think I think it goes more to Romney's legacy, and he will get lots of press. He'll get to be in the New York Times. He'll get, Washington Post will exalt him as a great American, and all that. But what he's not going to ever have, no one ever will ever invite him to the RNC convention again. He will basically be a man without a country, and the poor people of Utah will have a senator who's not welcome in the majority conference in the Senate. I mean, that's the challenge, and it's really sad that the people of Utah are being so poorly served by Senator Romney.
Okay, now also we were talking about this earlier, that the people of the investing community here we can anticipate that there will be an issue with the markets and with the jobs due to the coronavirus in China. But will there be an issue? How long will this issue last? My guess is it's a blip on the radar, and then the coronavirus effect on the markets and the jobs goes away in a few weeks. Would you predict that?
Well, I'm not an epidemiologist, but if the coronavirus remains contained and relatively rare, in that case, it doesn't become a worldwide contagion like the flu epidemic of 1919. Where millions of people were killed across the globe. If it remains contained and in fact doesn't have a high degree of transmittability, at that juncture, I think it's a blip. But you can't discount the fact that many people who order things from China are being told that they can't meet their delivery dates because of the coronavirus. And those people who normally be in the factories are not in the factories to do that work. And so that does have that. It is having an impact in terms of some orders from China that are being made, and that's just a fact. Whether or not those businesses get back on track is hard to say. One of the things that can't be missed on this, though, is President Trump's policy towards China really has been encouraging big businesses to move their supply chains, diversify their supply chains, so they aren't dependent upon one country providing the goods that they're ordering, the parts that they're ordering, the retail goods that they're going to sell that they're ordering. And so this really pushes the idea of diversifying from a single source, a single country source, as being really good business, because it doesn't have to be tariffs that are the driver. It can be an illness. It can be a lot, unrest. It can be a lot of things that can make a supply chain be not really that dependable. And so I think that this will reinforce the idea of diversification of supply chains, which is a good thing for our country. Let me make it clear. The loss of life by the coronavirus is horrific. And I don't care if it's Americans, Chinese, North Koreans, Thailand, people in Europe, I don't care. Point is, it is horrific, it is very sad. And while we're talking about this from an economic standpoint, it's very important we recognize and we pray for the people who are afflicted with this disease and who are fearful of the disease, because ultimately we're all humans, we're all in the same meat suits, and we need to be compassionate to those people who are being afflicted by a disease that's very frightening.
Yeah, and the Dow Jones and investing, that's when people vote with their feet. The truth tends to come out. A great example of this would be in 2008 and early 2009, there were a lot of people who were praising Barack Obama, but they were voting with their feet in the markets. And you would see a pretty significant crash in the Dow, and right after that there were a lot of layoffs. That's what tends to happen. You know, you lose your stock value, you lay off people to bring your stock value back up. And now we have, we did not see people vote with their feet in the last 2 or 3 months on the impeachment. Basically, from what I saw, the impeachment had no impact on the Dow Jones Industrial Average or the way people invested. Smart people who invest saw that and said, this is nothing. This is a whole bunch of nothingness. So are you surprised that there was no impact on the Dow of the impeachment?
No, I'm not surprised at all because nobody believed the president was going to be impeached, was actually going to be convicted, because the case was absurd. So, only the most partisan or bitter were the ones who thought that he should be removed, and we saw that reflected by Nancy Pelosi last night. And so, so the stock market said, we don't really factor it in. It isn't having an impact. The fact is, on coronavirus, we've seen the market. Yesterday, it moved up dramatically. Today, it was moving up. Last time I looked at it, and so we have on the coronavirus itself, you have a general sense of the markets that it's the impact that they feared it would have has been overblown.
Yeah, but I personally can imagine that there will be a blip on the radar. Just a blip, and it's probably coming in the next few days. And I just hope it doesn't cause a panic. My guess is most people are smart enough to know that it's just a temporary thing. Since
most trades done by algorithms and by computer algorithms, and there's stops within the system for those computer algorithms to reset. It is I think we've seen the blip. I think we saw the blip about 3-4 days ago, when the markets went down precipitously. And so now I think we're seeing it climb back up to a more regional level related to the fears of the coronavirus. And of course, if it turns out that the numbers out of China are really different, if a lot of companies are reporting that they can't get goods out of China, that they can't get their supply chains shut down out of China, that will have a different impact on the market, because that's not just fear, that's actually a real impact on companies' ability to do business, and obviously the markets would reflect that. We haven't seen that happen yet in terms of the markets reflecting those kind of challenges, but I can tell you firsthand, I know that products are not being delivered from China based upon the coronavirus and the actual manufacturer not being able to produce those products because they physically don't have workers, and telling people you have to order it somewhere else. We're refunding your money because we can't tell you when we're going to get it done.
Okay, now just moving on to one more thing. We didn't really get a chance to talk about how disastrous the results for the Iowa caucus were, and that's disastrous in 2 ways. First off, the actual tally of the Iowa caucus, and second off, kind of out of nowhere, it appears Pete Buttigieg, who we had all pretty much dismissed, wins the Iowa caucus. And
well, in fairness, they don't have the final votes in yet. Okay, they still haven't hit 100%. Yeah. So we don't actually know what happens when they hit 100%. What we do know is this: we know that the Democrats chose to use an app to do this. The app failed. The same company that developed the app also had a contract with Pete Buttigieg, who now the Bernie Sanders people are calling mayor cheat. Yeah. So there are allegations. I don't know what's true, what's not true with that. What I do know is this, and the way the Iowa caucus works is you go and you have a first ballot, and then candidates who don't make above the 15% threshold in an individual caucus, they have about 1,500, 1,600 of these individual meetings around the state. And so any candidate who doesn't make above 15% gets knocked off the actual, their people then are told, okay, vote for your second choice. Yeah. And so they go off and caucus with their second choice. And what Bernie Sanders did is Bernie Sanders won first ballot in the results I've seen. He won the first ballot. It's the second ballots that he slipped and got very little support from the other candidates, from the supporters of the other candidates. And what that means is Bernie Sanders has at least in Iowa, had a top end of about 30%. That was the maximum vote he was going to get. And everybody else, then as lesser candidates who didn't get enough votes, their people caucusing for them switched votes. They didn't go to Bernie Sanders. They went somewhere else. And that's because the Iowa voter, about 65% of them, said their first and foremost thing they were trying to do was to get somebody nominated who was electable. And Bernie Sanders is not viewed as electable. And so that's one of the things we learned from Iowa. The second thing we learned from Iowa was really simple. They were anticipating about 230,000 Democrats showing up at the Iowa caucuses. You have to show up to vote. You cannot do an absentee ballot. You can't do anything. You have to be physically in a meeting room. So they were expecting about 230,000 people, Democrats, in those meeting rooms. And instead, they got 170,000. It was a beautiful night. There was no snow. Wasn't no bad weather across the entire state. And the Democrats, at a time when they say that there's a lot of voter intensity on the Democrat side, at a time when they say Democratic turnouts can be at all-time highs, and that's why they're going to beat Trump. The truth is, the Democrats didn't turn out to the Iowa caucus. There was no a lot of intensity. And it appears the only place where there's a lot of intensity to get rid of this president is on the left coast and on the east coast, north of Maryland.
And in a lot of newsrooms across the country.
In newsrooms and on the Potomac River. Those are the only places where that intensity exists. It doesn't exist in real America, and that is the bad news for the Democrats. The fact they can't run a caucus makes them a joke. The fact that only 170,000 people showed up tells you they are on a pathway to political destruction.
Yeah, and another group you could add to that is academia, but, it just seems like there's a huge growing rejection or just not an acknowledgement of these attempted hit jobs on Trump. I once worked with a guy who I won't name, but in my last job, and he said, "Oh, Trump is horrible." Well, that was something you said 2 years ago when I had this conversation with him. It was a popular thing for people to say. And I kind of looked at him and said, "Well, how so? How is Trump horrible?" And you got the I can't really think of a reason. He says crazy things on Twitter, was what people were saying at the time. But you never really got a response. And that was 2 years ago. I think now more people are seeing that, okay, he really isn't that horrible. He's actually doing good. So they've been brainwashed to think he was horrible, but he's actually been doing very, very well. And again, I just looked at the Dow. It's at 29,000. Jobs picture is getting a lot better. We're safe. Whatever happened to that threat we used to get all the time from North Korea and the threat of ISIS? They're pretty much just being eliminated.
Well, ISIS has been, at least from a territorial standpoint, they've been eradicated. North Korea is a vassal of China, and so they rattle their swords or missiles when China is trying to extort something from us. And so whether or not we're going to be able to do a deal with North Korea remains to be seen. But the reality is, most people, here's the number, and we're going to have a jobs report come out on Friday again to show us what the situation was for January. But in the December numbers, here's what we know. There were fewer people unemployed in America in December of 2019 than there were at any time since December of 2000. Okay? We've got 21 million more Americans who are employed, who are working in the workforce since December 2000. And we haven't had fewer people unemployed since then. So that's what you're looking at. You're looking at you're looking at people who, if you want a job, you pretty much can get a job. Now, you may not be able to get a job doing what you hope to do, but there's jobs available to do if you want them. And that doesn't mean that everybody's satisfied and all that. It just means that the consumer confidence as a whole is higher. It means that people are, by and large, most people are not fearful for where they're going to get the next bite of food, and and as a result, you end up with an economic environment where people are not acting defensively in their households, and they have an expectation that the economy is going to be better for their children than it was for them. It's restoring a basic tenet that Americans believed for years and years, until we were told that we had to deal with a new normal. The new normal was declining expectations. That doesn't mean individual people aren't struggling. Obviously, in any economy, individual people are struggling. It means that the main hope is if there are jobs available. The main hope is, but when you sit there and you say, I want to get a job, and there are no jobs available, that's when it gets really scary. And so what we're seeing right now is an economy where a vast majority of Americans are thriving, and if James Carville is right, and from 1996, and it is the economy, stupid, then Donald Trump is going to walk through the door of the White House in January 21, 2021, and he'll be looking at Minority Leader Pelosi and kind of saying, don't rip the pages.
Now, if Majority Leader Pelosi, if Speaker of the House Pelosi becomes a minority leader, who becomes Speaker of the House? My guess is, let me guess, I'm going to guess who you're going to vote for. Jim Jordan.
Well, I don't get to vote, so, but it's
in your opinion.
For Congress to win, I don't get to vote, but no, I don't know who the Republicans would have.
Oh, looks like we froze here. I noticed some reception issues here. Reconnecting. It says there is a poor network connection. Well,
there's a number. So I'm not really. I don't know.
Rick, I'm sorry to say this, but we actually lost you for a second. Could you repeat that answer?
I don't know who's going to be the next speaker on the Republican side. I know that Jim Jordan did in fact endorse Kevin McCarthy for the speakership should the Republicans end up in the majority, which took a lot of people, including me, by surprise. But we're a long way from that, and I think the key is winning you got to win the majority, then you can worry about who's going to be speaker.
Yeah, a few years ago I actually did a project with a woman named Ileana Ross Layton, and there were those who thought she could have been a good Speaker of the House, but she was born in Cuba. I don't know if that held her back in any way, but she's retired now. I think Jim Jordan would probably be a solid choice. He seems to reflect the American right-leaning philosophy right now. He seems to be a good spokesperson for it.
I like Jim Jordan. I like Jim Jordan a lot. It's in fact, I'll break a little news. The next week, I've got an award sitting in my office that I'm going to present him. Just had to wait till impeachment got done so we could get together.
Yeah.
But it's I don't think Jim Jordan's going to put himself up to be speaker. I think Jim Jordan would love to be Judiciary Committee chairman, and to be able to do that role. I think that's what he aspires to, and and so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But we're a long way off, and it really depends on who gets elected, which Republicans get elected in this next election in November. And if the Republicans if the caucus ends up really a lot more conservative, Kevin McCarthy might not have a place as the speaker. But if you end up with taking some seats back in California and New York, and with a very narrow majority, Kevin McCarthy might be speaker because they choose to say we want somebody who's going to be able to protect those members from New York and California. So it remains to be seen who would be Speaker. We're a long way off. It's an uphill climb. Most people don't believe the Republicans are going to take control of the House. So it's an uphill climb that everybody needs to, start pulling a rope, because, ultimately, if you don't want to see Nancy Pelosi sitting behind the President of the United States for the next 4 years while he delivers the State of the Union address, with, giving her with that face she gives, you can, she's got Eli Manning face.
Yeah.
So, so if you don't want to see that anymore, then go out and get rid of the Democrat representatives who are voting her into office.
Eli Manning face. Okay, so just two more things
I
before.
can say that with my name being Rick Manning, I can use the term Eli Manning face.
Rick Manning and Eli Manning and Christian McCaffrey. Okay. Now, just before we go, two thoughts, just two things real quick. Your thoughts on, first off, I saw on social media people say we're applauding Nancy Pelosi for tearing up the State of the Union speech because they thought she was tearing up the lies. Was there a lie in the State of the Union that she was tearing up?
Here's what she was tearing up. She was tearing up a vision for American exceptionalism. She was tearing up a speech which outlined a bright future for America, a very positive speech, a speech which talked about a Tuskegee 100-year-old Tuskegee Airman and how he fought for his country, and his 11-year-old great-grandson who aspires to be in the Space Force, doing the same as his grandfather in a more sophisticated machine. We have so many wonderful stories in this country, and she's tearing apart the lowest unemployment rate for Black community, lowest unemployment rate for Hispanic community, lowest unemployment rate for the Asian community, forever, okay, in history. So when you get down to it, what she was tearing apart was the facts that Donald Trump has been a very successful president and deserves re-election, and she couldn't deal with it, and so she had to rip the page, almost akin to a little child sticking their fingers in their ears and start screaming because they couldn't handle the truth. She was akin to Tom Cruise wanting to know the truth, saying she wanted to know the truth, and Jack Nicholson saying you can't
handle the truth.
So that's what Nancy Pelosi was. She went into full pout mode, and then stuck her fingers in her ears and stomped her feet. And her way of doing that was ripping up the speech, which, by the way, is an official document. It wasn't a copy; it was the official document presented to the House. So it is and so it has to be. So it's stored in the National Archives as an official document in the United States. So she ripped it up. What can we say?
Okay.
Petulant peevage. That's Pelosi.
Yeah. Now another issue here. He received a Medal of Honor. Rush Limbaugh, diagnosed with lung cancer. He was pretty much like the guiding source, the guide of the conservative movement for, since I remember, like, when Clinton took office, is when he just became like the voice and the leader of the conservative movement in so many ways. He has lung cancer, probably doesn't have too much longer to go. Can he possibly be replaced? Is there anyone out there? He has Stein, the man with the accent, who replaces him from time to time, but he ain't Rush Limbaugh. Who could possibly be Rush Limbaugh?
Well, nobody's going to be Rush Limbaugh. The question is, and as a result, first of all, I'm not as pessimistic about his future as you are, but it's clear he's going to take some time off, and he may choose to come back using a totally different medium than straight radio. Although he's a real radio guy, and that he's not just a personality on the radio. He's a guy who grew up using ham radios as a kid and loves the medium. But having said that, I think what ends up happening, if there is a post-Rush world, is that a lot of these stations are currently on his network will be expanding into either hiring local talent, or they'll go to smaller, less.
We're breaking up again. Okay.
Right. And give those other talk shows a chance. You know, a guy like Lars Larson, who's really extraordinarily good, has a network of about around 200 radio markets that he's in. You know, I can see a Lars Larson being very attractive to a lot of people who are looking for someone who's a smart, witty replacement for Rush. But the bottom line is nobody's going to replace Rush.
No.
Because he's a one of a kind. It's, you know, they'll find people who can meet their individual audience needs and drive numbers. And there's a lot of really, really talented radio talk hosts out there who I get fortunate enough to get to talk to all the time, doing radio and talking about issues of the day. So this country has a ton of talent, and you know, when it comes time for Rush to step aside, I don't think there'll be any shortage of people who are very qualified and who will be reintroduced to new audiences who will love them.
Yeah, you know, and some of these local radio hosts not only comment on what's going on nationally, but they understand what's going on at the state and local level, and that also draws an audience that Rush would not be able to draw. And Rush Limbaugh couldn't talk about what's going on with the McAllen City Commission, but a local host where I am here.
He wouldn't want to. And quite honestly, here's the key. The people who are living in Omaha, Nebraska, I'll give you a hint, they don't care what's going on in the McAllen City Council either.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, and that's why you have people who are local broadcasters. A lot of stations have, you know, some national syndicated, and then they have local. And the local guys talk about what's happening locally, and the nationally syndicated guys talk about what's happening in Washington, D.C., or in big impact events around the country that everybody's talking about. And so it's just two different roles. Listen, the fact is, Rush Limbaugh changed everything in radio. The only medium that conservatives have an advantage in right now is talk radio. And that is directly because of Rush Limbaugh. So take it however you want to take it. Rush Limbaugh was deserving of getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Trump. You know, and I believe that the way it was done there at the State of the Union was more a reflection of the illness that Rush is fighting. He's fighting for his life with the stage 4 lung cancer. And, you know, the difficulty under those circumstances to be able to bring him back up to Washington, D.C. to go through a ceremony is pretty hard. And so, you know, given the severity of the illness, I think President Trump was right to do it right there, right then, and make it so, because there may not be another opportunity. And we pray that's not the case, but when you're dealing with this severe of an illness, you can't take anything for granted.
Now, one of the things that strikes me about Rush is he was always informed. He always knew everything, very well prepared. He fully understood the issue of the day and its significance in so many ways, and its history and its background and what led to it and what it could lead to in the future. And again, you know, I don't know if anyone really has it like Rush, but some of those local hosts are very, very good. They're very bright.
They are very.
Do you remember years ago when I used to? I'm sorry?
I'd like to tell you the main thing Rush has going for him, and I'm not speaking of him in the past tense. I mean, what he has going for him is he's funny. He looks at the funny side of things. You know, he used to do the thing where he did the environmental report, and they played the sound of chainsaws going in the background.
Yeah.
He is a guy with a massive sense of humor.
He is funny.
And as a result, you know, anybody can get up and rail about different issues that are going on. It's a special kind of person who can do it in a way that people get entertained, where they come away smiling, and you know, they're informed, but they're also entertained, because ultimately people aren't going to just tune in to, you know, a buzzsaw of information necessarily, at least not as readily as they'll turn into the same buzzsaw, but given with a laugh, given with some funny asides. And ultimately that's why Rush is the greatest radio personality in history.
Probably. But I was saying, do you remember years ago when I used to go do that show up in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, with the host Kelly Spinner? She comes to mind as a really bright local host. But what I used to do there is I'd show up about a half hour, 15 minutes early with a notepad and just say, hey, can we talk about this? Can we talk about that? We can talk about this. I would bring up things that I didn't think she knew, and I'd find out that she just knew everything down to the intricate details. I'd say something like, hey, can we talk about, the way such and such stock prices fell when Obama took office, and she knew the exact numbers and what that meant, and it was just like amazing how informed some of these people are. And I guess a lot of it comes from their career being in the media business, in the news business, but also these are just very bright people. There's a lot of very bright people at the local level.
I find that in my work, there's the brightest people I come across are radio talkers, and the reason for that is they have to be quick. They have to have a breadth of information, know a lot of stuff. They have to be interesting, and because otherwise nobody wants to listen to them. And they have to be able to put words together under pressure. And I've sat behind mics on the radio where I'm the host, and where things start going wrong, and you really have to start thinking on your feet in a big old hurry.
Yeah.
Because it's when things start going wrong, it's all about you. And guess what you don't get to do? You don't get to just be quiet and say, oh, we're going to go off the air until we fix this. No, you got to hold it together. So those guys who do that, those women who do that, they're spectacularly smart and effective, and they're great communicators. And so I'm not worried about the state of the talk radio industry. I do think that Rush is impossible to replace because he's the undisputed king. He's the one who really created the national syndicated media, talk show media, and he is a guy who many people credit with saving AM radio as a result.
Yeah, and also really defining the path for the conservative movement. I mean, he really was. If you remember, he used to have his ditto heads. Basically.
Back to the 1994 election, the Gingrich Contract with America election. We look back to that. They had Rush Limbaugh at their, when they were being sworn in, and a few other radio talkers. But they had Rush Limbaugh there because they acknowledged that it's a medium that they were able to, the talk radio medium is how they were able to get their message out without having to rely on the Washington Post, the New York Times, and ABC, NBC, CBS to deliver the message. Because those mediums have never been on conservative side.
No.
And and the biggest shock about Donald Trump's success is that those mediums, along with our social media friends, I use that term euphemistically, are uniformly anti-Trump. And yet, throughout this impeachment, his favorability numbers have gone up because people have been looking at what's really going on, and they say, this is crazy. And the New York Times and the Washington Post and all those media manipulators, you know what they discovered? Their ability to move the needle has been destroyed.
I would have to agree.
No longer have the capacity to manipulate the public in the same way they have in the past. And that is the biggest news out of impeachment.
Yeah, I was reading that there's a famous media blog called FTV Live, and every year he does the best and worst. And the worst of 2019, Jeff Zucker from CNN. And this is like a left-leaning blog, But they're saying Jeff Zucker for absolutely destroying what was at one time a somewhat incredible news source.
We always called it Clinton News Network.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it wasn't the crazy news network. And now they've become the crazy news network. And they hate Trump so much that they'll probably give Romney his own show.
Yeah.
So
they also used to call it Chicken Noodle News. The other thing, or the Communist News Network is another one I heard. But I just have to admit to this. You're going to love this, Rick. When I was at Fox News Channel, I would come in on my daily scan and check out CNN.com because at the time it was everyone knew it was liberal, but it was a somewhat legitimate news source because you'd read the headlines and it would say, president proposes taxes. And now, but then just about 2 years ago, I read one of the headlines, and it wasn't like a news headline. It read, Trump always takes the low road. I said, well, that's propaganda. They're not saying things that are legitimate journalism anymore.
Well, journalism, I hate to say it, but in many respects, journalism's dead. It's all opinion pieces. And, you read a story and all of a sudden at the bottom it says, inserts either the editor or the reporter's opinion. And you say, wait a second, you did really good until I got to this point. And all of a sudden I now know your opinion.
Yeah.
The story, the way journalism is supposed to work is the reporter gives you the story, and you don't know when it's over what the reporter thought about it. You just know, you're just able to think for yourself about it and be able to say you've got competing opinions, competing ideas, competing perspectives, and that's called reporting.
Yeah.
That's journalism. And that is a lost art in America today.
Yeah, well, it changed a lot, and one of the reasons it's changed is because of the rise of social media and the internet. Just in my career, I witnessed that, and we'd had consulting firms come in and say, hey, you got to do it in this way because you're up against all new competition now. It's not just you against 3 other local stations, it's you against thousands of news sources, so you got to do things in this way, and that's where a lot of it gets manipulated. These consulting...
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Well, the fact is, what people want on these kind of podcasts, I've read that if you don't get people to pay attention within the first 10 seconds, they click off. Now, for anybody who's watching this now, it doesn't pertain to you.
Yes.
But clearly, the challenge with podcasts is you have to hit really fast on something that people are interested in order to keep their attention, because the little red X is really easy to click and take you off. And with that, we're not going to do any more. We're going to basically close this out because we know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you joining us. Please click the subscribe.
Subscribe.
At the bottom will help. And he's Frank McCaffrey over there, and I'm Rick Manning, and we will talk to you next time about the issues of the day.
See ya.